Alright, I think I will call this video a second shot at the unintelligent design, and we will tackle the subject of how do you get intelligence from an unintelligent system, because that's a real problem for some people. I don't mean to be patronizing and insulting. I just hate that you really do have to pick all this stuff to pieces, and then people aren't going to watch all the videos, and they'll take one little piece of the video and say that doesn't make any sense because they didn't hear the whole thing. And well, whatever. I won't complain. Let's just get to it. Alright, so you have to understand what is our intelligence. Our intelligence is a neural system that started off in very small, little, tiny cellular organisms as a way of a control mechanism. I mean, microorganisms had, there was advantage to them to be able to keep their mouth shut sometimes and keep their mouth wide open at other times. To do the flight thingy, to run towards, run away. And so over time, systems developed where there would be this connection between a nerve and a certain stimulus. Okay, that's kind of obvious, right? And so if you think of those as just reflexes, just as a trigger mechanism, a reflex. A certain condition exists, and then a certain action is taken. Well, as that evolved, there was probably all kinds of weird circumstances that developed. Nerves crashing into each other, let's say. So let's say you had two reflexes that did opposite things or caused an opposite reaction, or were supposed to. And let's say they collided with each other, and now the signals were being magnified, or they were being, there was a mixed signal, a mixed reaction. You could almost think of that kind of an accident taking place, and maybe some kind of accident that created what we have now, which is this concept of sensation, of sentience, of feeling. It's like taking a digital system and having an analog component is one way I've metaphorized it, but all we can do is metaphorize it. We really can't. We can't explain the exact system, first because we don't have the technology or the instrumentation to do it, and second, even if we did, the complexity of it is likely going to be beyond some sort of 5-sentence explanation. But the point is that now you have this capacity to feel, this good and bad feeling, and that is a really important, a necessary component, I think, to the development of intelligence. Because now a system can do more than just, now it's more than just blind reflexes and an automatic response. Now you can have a system where the reaction is built upon reflexes upon reflexes upon reflexes. I mean, basically you have a reflex that causes a sensation, and then you can have a reaction to the sensation, another reflex that causes another reaction and another reaction and another, and you have these whole chains of reaction. And secondly, what you have now is the idea of positive and negative, good and bad, creates the possibility to do pure logic, where you can, through association, connect things, put things in categorize them. And the only way I think that could possibly work is that you need this mechanism of feeling, because you have to be able to verify connections and associations. So if you associate something with, let me put it this way, the association has to be reduced to something simple enough that the logic can understand it, and it can understand positive and negative. It's not going to understand sort of feeling that there's this over there and something over there and scary, blah, blah. Ambiguous isn't going to do it any good, because it's not going to be able to deal with ambiguous. But ambiguous over time and through memory will allow it to define a circumstances as positive or negative, put them in a category. I guess that's the key word I'm looking for, is this logic is sort of dependent on being able to categorize things. So you define them, you associate them, you qualify them based on probabilities, and what the likelihood of a circumstance being is. So that's all we are now, is that a really extravagant manifestation of a process like that, where it would be really to an organism's advantage to act specifically to their environment specifically to their circumstances, to learn life in their world, not in some generic, programmed, oh, the world is probably going to be like this. No, it's better to be able to react to each day. So if it's going to rain today, I will, as it is, I will act differently than if I have some notion that it rains, 1 out of 3 days. That's not as valuable information as I know it's going to rain today, because I can read the signals that say yes, rain now, and I can react and live specifically to that circumstance instead of reacting to some ambiguous threat of rain. All right, I didn't do that perfectly, but all right, so the next step in this is understanding the difference between, now that you have this logic machine that's really just reflexes. Let's just remember that, because that's the key word here. Our brain is just a bunch of reflexes. I mean, it's just a bunch of reacting chains or links or I mean, I've always thought of it as something much more complex, but when I really went through it, it's just reflexes. We tie things together, and it's that simple. I mean, there might be 30 or 40 connections on each neuron, all this other stuff, but the meat of it is the fact that there is just this connection, this reflex. A causes B, causes C, causes D. It's a chain of reactions, and that makes it much easier to connect it to that primitive life form that was just doing something very simple. We basically have their brain, we just have a billion of their brains working together. So anyway, so look, the difference with and then through our evolution, you'd see that the brain would be useful. This tool of memory, learning, knowing good from bad, would be very useful to an organism in navigating its environment. So it's basically, in its origins, a scheming tool. I mean, it doesn't just do pure intellectualizing. It doesn't do thinking for the sake of thinking. It's intended, it's been built to do a specific job, which is to make an organism that possesses it able to scheme their environment, to beat all the competition, to succeed. And that's what it's intended to do. And so, but now we have this capacity through our evolution and through development of culture and a knowledge base, and having the capacity to do vocabulary and have enough words in our vocabulary. These are all things I've talked about in other videos. They're all necessary components of what has made us different from the animal kingdom, is the fact that we acquired these things, 70 or 250,000 years ago, whatever number you want to pick, and that gave us that opened a huge potential that existed. Some subtle change created a huge release of potential capacity, and we developed that capacity over time. I mean, the only difference between me and somebody 250,000 years ago is the fact that I went to school, that I got exposed to television, I've heard all these other people talk, I learned a language. That's the difference. But physically, there isn't much difference at all. All right, so anyway, yeah, so now the end game. So what is intelligence? I mean, if it isn't, its only real purpose is to define an environment. It describes it. It helps you quantify it, to establish what it is. And when it doesn't have that as a mission, it doesn't really have any point at all. And so now we've sort of changed the game a little. We don't have to use our brain all the time to scheme and trip each other up and fuck with each other. We can use it to contemplate. And so what do? We use it to entertain our emotions, to entertain the animal that we still are, that needs, that wants. So we'll fantasize, and we'll use our brain to create an elaborate fantasy. We'll hope, and we'll wish, and we'll want, and we'll do all that stuff in a much more complex manner, because we're going to add the nuance of this changing of perspective that we can add through our intelligence, through doing logic and reasoning and building little stories inside our head. So it's a more detailed and richer reality. But the bottom line is it still doesn't have a purpose unless there's somebody to watch the movie who's going to be moved by the movie, and that's the game. So intelligence, if you can compare it to something that we perceive as valuable, it really only has value as an instrument of like a blueprint, or like instructions, like It really has to have a purpose, it has to be feeding something. And what we're using it for now is to feed our need. Um, but ultimately, there's nothing valuable for intelligence to exist without some sort of feeling animal to feed off of it, of what it can produce. I guess that's the bottom line. So these people who think we're going to some expansive consciousness where we're just going to live on knowledge, it's kind of silly, because that's not what's going to happen. The only thing we can do with our intelligence is create more elaborate ways to entertain the little dopey animal that lives in our core. That's the game. The little dopey animal is all there really is to us that means anything. The intelligence is nice. The intelligence empowers us. It gives us the ability to do so much, but it's not the answer to this life problem of want and need and the need to feed, in a sense.